Hey everybody, James Shepard here with a special edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. Today is going to be a shorter episode, but I want to give you trends at the macro level. So macro trends that we're seeing in the payments industry. This comes from the consulting side of my business with ccsalespro.com. I spend a lot of time sitting in my chair I have right over here to the left of me in my studio with a big bookshelf. And I spend a lot of time sitting there thinking, reading articles, talking to reporters in the payments industry, talking to CEOs of large companies, ISO owners and small companies, individual agents, point of sale companies, PayFacs. And so I have all of these different inputs from different companies and organizations in the payments ecosystem. And I then get to sit down and think about it. And every once in a while, I feel like, wow, you know what? There's a lot of trends that I'm seeing. And I want to make sure I'm sharing those trends with my audience here on the podcast to make sure that you're making the appropriate adjustments to your business and thinking through potential opportunities that you may not have had time to sit down and think about yourself, or just simply haven't had the inputs from different individuals and companies to see these trends taking off. So we're going to do this in 2 episodes. I'm going to record it together here, but we're going to do it in 2 episodes. This week is going to be macro trends in payments. Next week is going to be micro trends in payments, meaning practical implications of the trends we're going to talk about today. Let's dive in. Ready? Here we go. Number 1 on my list is a shift to electronic forms of payment. Okay. Now, you might think this is the most obvious trend ever, and of course it is, but it has accelerated lately. As we're looking at the numbers, consumers continue to shift away from cash and check payments, and they shift towards electronic payment. Now, you might think, well, James, this is old news. Well, you might think that. But what about things like B2B, which we'll talk about next week? B2B transactions are making this shift. Contractors making this shift. A lot of business types that really weren't doing a lot of electronic transactions, now they are. And so we're just seeing overall, the entire market is really shifting away from the cash and check payments. So this is good news for us, because as we look at our industry at kind of the highest level and we say, what's the available market share? What's happening in our space? The good news is, there's a lot happening. There's a lot going on right now. And there's a lot of transactions that are going from that cash and check over to electronic payments. So the question is, well, how big of a piece of the pie are you going to be able to get? You need to make money on these transactions that are occurring electronically. And so the question is, how do you get a bigger piece or a bigger segment of that market, of that pie? Okay. So number 1 is a shift to electronic forms of payment. Number 2 is a much more fragmented market, Now, some of you might think that I'm a little crazy when I say this, because what you see in the news is you see this company acquires this company acquires that company, and you see these roll-ups and these mergers and acquisitions going on right now in our industry, where lots of combinations. And so you might think to yourself, James, what do you mean fragmented? The market's not fragmented. The market is, coalescing around several humongous companies. And to some extent that is true. But when I say fragmented, what I'm referring to here is the verticalization or the specialization in our industry, to where payment processing is becoming something that is integrated into technology. I mean, that's nothing new, but that technology is becoming much more numerous. There's so many different companies which we'll talk about, but it's this idea of a fragmented market. As we look at it now, you used to be able to say, well, I do payment processing, I sell payment processing, and everybody kind of knew what that meant. Now it's like, well, what do you mean you sell payment processing? Do you sell, QuickBooks plugin integration to card not present merchants? Do you sell e-commerce solutions to e-commerce merchants? Do you sell B2B wholesalers on, facilitating their payment transactions? Do you sell point of sale systems to restaurants? Do you sell retail inventory management? It's really, when you say I sell payment processing, the question now is almost, okay, but with what technology integration, right? Maybe you sell standalone terminals to small merchants. Okay, that's a niche. Right. But the idea here is that the market overall is, it's becoming increasingly fragmented, meaning saying that I sell payment processing is no longer a thing. It's now, you sell payment processing to who? And so this is a trend you got to be aware of, because, on even a higher level trend that many of you may not be aware of, the cost of making good software is coming down dramatically. Okay. And so what happens is, used to be a company would come out and say, Well, it's going to cost us $5 million to build a software solution for, for retailers. So we better build one that's for all retailers. And we need to go after the biggest market that we can get. So we're going to make the best features we can that service all these different retail merchant types. Now, the companies are starting up and saying, well, it's only going to cost us $300,000 to build a really good system. So why don't we build it for, barbershops, and let's have just a barbershop point of sale experience. So what's happening is, it's fragmented because now all of a sudden it's feasible to make a solution that is really for one particular vertical, and it's becoming a lot easier to build that software. And so, you're going to see this fragmentation of the market to where when we say we do payment processing, we can't think of it anymore in those terms. We have to think of it in terms of payment processing integrated with what technology, and think about our strategy in those terms, because that's going to continue to happen. The market's going to continue to be fragmented in that way. And the payment processing companies that recognize that and take advantage of that are going to be the long-term winners in the market. Okay. Number three, at this kind of high macro level, the third one is a shift to alternate payment methods. Okay. Alternate payment methods. Now, I talked about this one in the past on the podcast, but whenever I say this, everybody immediately thinks about Bitcoin, right? That's always where we go, is crypto. And I think we need to be aware of crypto, certainly, right? We've seen some really big setbacks lately with the biggest crypto exchanges out there, and some really big issues, legally and things of that nature. So, we've seen issues there, but, the cryptocurrency is still not going mainstream just yet. There's some really interesting use cases, and I think we want to be very aware of those and be, cognizant of what's happening there over the next 5 to 10 years. But when I talk about alternate forms of payment, what I'm talking about is just wallet share. When you think about the traditional merchant account, where you're allowing a business owner to accept Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and maybe American Express and PIN debit, right? Those 5. When you think about a merchant account that allows a merchant to accept those 5, the question is, what percentage of the wallet share does that merchant account get you in a standard merchant location? Now, 5 years ago, that number was 100%, right? I mean, pretty close. There just really weren't any other variables really to that. You know what I mean? Now, today, we have to look at a lot of other things, right? We look at things like P2P. Think about Venmo, Zelle, even the PayPal has some interesting things going on there. And business owners are accepting that. I got an agent reached out to me that said, I got a merchant that is accepting Zelle. How do I switch them over? And it's like, well, that's a whole other conversation, right? Because Zelle is free. And so they're doing these, P2P transactions. So there's certainly value propositions to be made there, but we have to be aware of these switches to P2P. We have to be aware of the switch of going through third-party applications that have their own payment processing built in. Thinking about DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, Groupon, different things like this, where the money is flowing to our merchant, but it's flowing through different channels. And we're going to continue to see that increase, right? We're going to continue to see a growth in that. Okay. I do have one more I wanted to mention, actually, this higher macro level. I forgot. One more I wanted to mention was the trend in integrated services, financial services. So the other big trend that we're seeing now, and if you want to see a good example of this, go and look at Block, which is the owner of Square, and look and see all the things they're doing. Go look at Intuit and see all the things that they're doing. Things like business banking services that are integrated into things, lending services, right? Money management, all of these kind of things. These are all being built into the technology as well, in addition to the payment processing. And so what we're seeing is this shift where we have a fragmented market, right? That's going after all these different, well, I say at the top level, we see a growing industry where more electronic payments are happening now than ever have before. And it looks like that trend will continue. We see a fragmented market where we have unique solutions for all these different types of verticals and different business needs, software solutions that can solve a variety of problems that have payments integrated, because the cost of creating great software is is going down. But we also see these new solutions are being built with alternate payment methods in mind, not just crypto, but more pressing things like P2P, delivery services, third-party apps. Even FedNow is going to be a big shift of, what kind of innovations are going to be built around FedNow, right? And so we got to think through all of those scenarios, but those alternate payment methods, right? So the alternate payment methods, that's just like a big one. And then you tack onto that at the end. Now we're also seeing all of these other financial services like business banking services and lending and things like that are also being integrated into these fragmented solutions that are designed for specific verticals. So those are the four at the highest level. Now I want to give you 3 macro trends that actually feed off of those 4. Okay. So if you're getting a little bit like, oh, James, this is too much information, I get it. Okay. You might need to pause it here, come back and finish the rest a little bit later. I know it's a lot of information, but I really think it's important for us to wrap our mind around these things if we want to be successful in the payment space. Okay. These are things I think about on a daily basis as I work with my consulting clients to make sure that I'm positioning them for success. Right. So I've got a few others I want to share with you. Okay. So as a result of these trends, what are we seeing today in our market? All right, in the payments industry, specifically in the ISO agent community, but even the payments ecosystem as a whole. Number 1, an exponential increase in the number of ISVs, independent software vendors, an exponential increase in the number of independent software vendors. And I'd even say a really big shift of market share towards existing ISVs. So we're kind of seeing the software world is kind of eating the payments world, is one way to look at that, right? So in a real way, payment processing is becoming part of the technology as we've discussed. And now because it's so much less expensive to create software, it now makes sense for a company to start up in order to solve a very specific problem for a very specific type of business and have payment processing built in so they can monetize payments, okay? So you want to be aware of this, right? What are you doing? How is your strategy impacted by that trend? What are you doing to make money off of the fact that there's a lot more ISVs? Or are you just trying to fight against a trend? One thing I think is a universally losing strategy over the long haul is when you see an inevitable trend and decide that your strategy is going to be to push back against it. You're not going to push back the tide, okay? If your strategy is saying, well, I hope I can keep selling payment processing for a while until these ISVs all come and take over the industry, that's a bad strategy, right? There's this inevitable push saying the ISVs are coming, they're here, and there's going to be more and more and more and more of them. And every time you sell a merchant, there's going to be 2 or 3 software vendors behind you that are going to say, wait a minute, why'd you put that terminal in? Why are you using that general solution when you could use our really specific solution that's just for this business type, that's integrated with all the right companies and does all the right things and has integrated, financial services for your business type and lending. And, they're rolling all of this together and making these unbeatable packages for these individual business types. We're going to continue to see that trend. It's kind of a no-brainer. I've never talked to anybody that disagrees with me on that. Like that is going to happen. So the question is, how does your strategy adjust to that reality? Number 2, a significant increase in capital, okay, for the payments industry. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, whenever you see an industry that has above average return on investment, you see an industry where you have growth, right? We talked about the big trend that there's more electronic payments. What's going to follow is going to be capital. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing an increased number of investors who want to buy payments companies. Why? Because they can get a good return on their money and they can do different things. They can specialize and they can add services and they can do things to increase profitability. So, we see an increase in capital. We see private equity firms, quite a few now that specialize only in the payments industry. They're acquiring payments companies, payments technology companies, ISVs, whatever it might be, and they're putting these portfolios together of companies where there's going to be some shared operating efficiencies, right, and some synergy between them, and they're building these portfolios in the private equity world. We see companies coming out now that are much more aggressively going to buy merchant portfolios when they realize they can add technology and increase lifetime value. So there's a lot more capital now that's coming into our industry. And you could look at that as either, again, a good thing or a bad thing, right? If you have big growth plans and you need access to capital to make those growth plans happen, you're looking to go more towards technology, you're looking to build your own ISVs, or you're looking to do, acquire software companies, then you're pretty excited about this increase in capital availability and liquidity in our industry. If you're like, hey, I'm going to hang on to this tried and true thing that I'm doing now, and I'm just going to kind of hunker down here and pretend that all the technology people don't exist, then this is really bad news for you, because when there's more capital, all of a sudden things become more competitive, right? All of a sudden, companies are going to be willing to pay a higher upfront bonus to get a sale. Companies are going to be willing to do free equipment just to get a sale. Companies are going to be willing to do maybe a lower price point in order to lock in a longer term agreement or to place technology that they know is going to be valuable. So with more capital comes more competition, right? Fierce competition, things that we need to be on the lookout for. So we see an exponential increase in the number of software companies, many of them funded by venture capital, many of them funded by private equity firms, or well, not usually private equity for a new one, but investors and venture capital and things like that. We see private equity firms, and all of that. So we see this big push of increased capital coming into our industry, availability of capital. Finally, though, number three, and the last one here, is a significant shift in marketing tactics. Okay. If you haven't used ChatGPT yet, you may not fully understand what I'm talking about here, but we're going to see a big shift in the way marketing happens. Okay. And I actually believe this is going to be a good thing for the agents out there and the ISOs with agents if they can embrace these other trends. The day that ChatGPT went live, the whole concept of blogging, in a lot of ways kind of died. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Yes, you still want to have your blog. I'm still going to have my blog. I'm still going to have my show notes. But the truth is, it's so easy now for people to produce long form content, that it's going to very quickly become less and less relevant, because it's like there's just too much of it. There's so much long form content out there, and there already was way too much, in my opinion, but now it's going to be ChatGPT, and it's so much easier. So a lot of the content marketing approaches that worked in the past, are not going to work. I think the ones that are going to be most effective now are going to be that face-to-face, person-to-person interaction. Those are going to be really, really disproportionately effective, because as AI sort of takes over the marketing, the online marketing, and is, creating the image ads and creating the copy for that, you're just going to see so much of it. It's going to be so easy to write a good ad that it's going to become increasingly competitive. And I think you're going to actually see a little bit of a shift back towards people saying, well, I read this online, but I don't know if that was written by an AI or not. Let me talk to a person. And I think that's going to be a real trend that we're going to see as well. But I think marketing has shifted. I actually really believe that telemarketing, I know this for a fact just from what we've been doing lately with some of my own companies, telemarketing is still really effective when you use telemarketing to push a content marketing approach. I posted about it on LinkedIn recently, but we got to look at these shifts in marketing and look at these shifts in the way that marketing is going to be done, because however you're marketing right now, those things are going to change. AI is having a huge, huge impact on that, as well as, of course, social media and this shift in attention to social media and all that. So we got to look at the changing marketing landscape as well and think about, how are we generating leads? How are we educating the market? How are we going after our vertical? So those are what I consider macro trends that are impacting the payments industry in a major way. So think about those trends, maybe take a little bit of time and write those out and think about, how should this be impacting your strategy? When I say these trends, do they make you afraid? Do they make you feel like, my time is running out, or do they make you excited and make you feel like, hey, you know what? I'm glad these are the trends because my business strategy aligns with these trends. I'm starting my own ISV, or I'm partnered with an ISV, or I'm helping ISVs do payments, right? Or, wow, that's great because I have a great growth strategy where I'm going after B2B merchants and here's what I'm doing with them. And, are you feeling like, okay, these are good trends and they're going to help me, or these are bad trends and they're going to hurt me? Because the truth is, if you're honest with yourself, all the trends I just said, if you wrote them all out, I don't think there's any of them where you would look at that and say, I disagree. I doubt it. I mean, I'm more than happy to have you disagree with me, but I don't think you're going to disagree with any of the things I just said. So the question is, what are you doing in order to embrace these trends and to make money from these trends and be competitive with these trends, over the next 5 to 10 years? So my name is James Shepard. Thank you for listening to this special edition of the Merchant Sales Podcast. Check back in next week, and I'm going to talk about micro trends and talk about practical implications. What should you as an ISO or an agent, what should you be doing as a result of these trends in order to make more money and be more competitive? And I'll talk about that next week.